In this episode of James on IT, we're going to talk about Crowdstrike and how it caused over 8 million computers to blue screen of death all at once. So first off, what is Crowdstrike? Maybe you've never heard of it, but you've definitely heard of that company now. Crowdstrike is actually a really well-known company in the cybersecurity world. They provide antivirus services as well as security operations centers for their various clients. This makes them one of the leaders in cybersecurity. However, after this past weekend, I think they're well known for something else. Now, I would like to point out, this is not the first time an update has caused blue screens for Windows computers. Microsoft does this almost every single month. There's at least a few that blue screen. The issue with this is understanding the scale. Now, the ones that use Crowdstrike typically are not your end home users. Crowdstrike is actually pretty expensive software, so a lot of enterprises use it. Matter of fact, according to techbusinessnews.com, they are responsible for 298 out of the Fortune 500 companies and over half of the Fortune 1000 companies, as well as 8 out of 10 of the top financial firms in the entire world. So they are very much an enterprise-focused security solution. But that's what makes them so public, is because so many people rely on these services to be able to get their packages, transport from one city to another through flights, be able to bank, process credit card transactions, shop online, and so much more. This made them very, very public when they had one update that caused this massive crash. Now, how did that update affect it? Well, to understand that, we need to look at how Windows operates. Now, most people think once you're admin, you're top tier, right? You've got full access to everything. That's not true in Windows. Administrator is actually somewhat limited account. Now, in user space, it's unlimited. But as far as the whole operating system is concerned, it's actually limited by quite a bit. There's an area called the kernel level. Matter of fact, they describe this as several different rings in the operating system to protect the most sensitive areas of each Windows computer. Now, there's a total of 4 rings. The first one is ring 0, and that's where the kernel lives. And the kernel, understand, just to explain that real quick, the kernel is the operating system. That is the main program that relates to the hardware, to the software. Everything runs through the kernel because it is the number one process. If the kernel dies, your whole Windows goes down with it. And that's what made this update so bad. Now, with those rings, ring 0 is the kernel. Then you have rings 1 and 2, and that's where various drivers live. Those drivers, that's what the kernel uses to interface to the hardware that you have plugged into your computer. Depending on the driver needs and the access it requires, it's going to be installed in one of those 2 locations. And then the final ring, that's where you and I live. That's where we have Chrome open as our browser, or Edge, or maybe our word processor, or YouTube that you're watching right now. That's in user space. That's in user land. That's ring number 3. So ring 0, where the kernel sits, that's the highest level. And the only way to interface with any of these rings above user is through APIs, or in this case, Crowdstrike, as well as many other antivirus vendors, because they're not alone, they have to get a special certification from Microsoft in order to be able to write their programs and have access to this high level in all Windows systems. And you can only access this via programming. This isn't something that you can just suddenly launch Chrome in the kernel level. You really can't do that. But you can set up specific, my kitty decided to come up and visit. You can have specific drivers set there, or in this case, they'll run their antivirus in this level for their definitions and things. And they do this as a security measure. Now, a lot of people are like, why do they need to run in there? Well, this is why. Now, for a lot of antivirus systems, they use this level in order to protect themselves. That way, their process is the highest level process in the system. That protects it from something coming in at a user level, malicious code, trying to compromise the antivirus software. So by them running at a higher level, that gives them the access to remove it. Because if something like a rootkit is at kernel and they're in the user ring 3, well, they're going to get access denied if they try and make that change and kill that program. Now, what's interesting is AV vendors have been writing in the kernel area for a long time now, pretty much since Windows first introduced these rings in Windows NT. But a while back, actually a few years ago, it could be several years ago now, I can't remember exactly the year, but Microsoft was pushing to get AV vendors out of that kernel level. They wanted to have them use APIs. Well, the antivirus vendors pushed back against Microsoft and like, no, we have to have that high a level in order to safely secure systems. So it's interesting that Microsoft brought this up years ago. So it wouldn't surprise me if this topic comes back up again here soon, just because we can see how one single update can cause so much destruction. Now let's talk about that update. Now, what actually happened that caused Windows to blue screen and crash after that update? Well, it's important to understand what those updates do. Typically with those updates, they're antivirus definitions, they look for certain behavioral patterns, things like that in the antivirus software. Now, with this particular update, the issue was really code quality. They should have had a peer review, and they maybe have and missed it. I don't know exactly what happened, and it hasn't come out yet exactly. But essentially, what the update did was it was looking for something in memory, but it was out of bounds. In other words, it was looking for an address that didn't exist. That then caused a loop, which then forced Windows to blue screen and crash it because it was running in that kernel area. Now, if it was running in the user level, it wouldn't have been a big deal. It would have crashed the program itself instead of the entire Windows system. But that's the difference. When you're running right with the kernel, it's easy to trip and make the whole system fall, which is what happened. Now, Crowdstrike very quickly, and I got to give them kudos for this, because they immediately were like, guys, it's our fault. We're sorry. This is what you need to do. The bad part about it is it required IT teams to go out and touch every single system manually, boot it into safe mode so they could remove those drivers out of the kernel area by deleting a couple files out of the System32 directory. Links down below on those details from Crowdstrike. But it's unfortunate that it required that extensive of a process, because that's very, very time consuming, having to manually touch each one. So I feel for our fellow IT folk that had to handle this over this past weekend. I will say one thing. There's a reason why everyone calls Fridays Read-Only Friday. You don't make big updates on a Friday, not before a weekend. Things are running smooth. Fridays are great for documentation, not making changes. But unfortunately, it seems like this update got pushed out on a Friday, right before a weekend, which is actually kind of a good thing in some ways, because this affected these companies less, but it affected the public companies like the airlines, banks, and many others more publicly, because people were out shopping and traveling and things like that. So it's a two-edged sword. But essentially understand this is an issue because Crowdstrike, like every other antivirus vendor, they force the updates. They don't wait. Typically, your antivirus software will update not just once, but multiple times throughout the day as it gets updates for its definitions, behavioral patterns, new sensors that it needs to check, because attack patterns change constantly. I think I've read a statistic a while back that there are literally thousands of new malware deployed every hour. And antivirus vendors are fighting a losing battle to try and keep up because they're always behind the curve. No matter how good that company is, they're always behind the malware writers because they're looking for new ways, whereas AV vendors are trying to protect against what's coming out, as well as the past vulnerabilities, as well as try and make their software compatible with all these various systems and configurations that are out there, because there's no one way to run an IT system. Everyone has different ways of running their systems and different programs that they use in their day-to-day businesses. So while this is tragic, I'm glad CrowdStrike fessed up to it very quickly and tried to remediate. Bad thing is according to one news article I was reading about on TechCrunch, one of the things that they were trying to do is give out $10 Uber Eats gift cards to those affected, and it's kind of, that's not good for the PR. That's kind of a slap in the face. So it'll be interesting to see from the fallout. I imagine CrowdStrike may not survive this. They may come out, but they're definitely not going to be the same company. This has forced a lot of IT departments to rethink how they are rolling out their AVs, what kind of vendors they're working with. I've seen people talk about on Reddit, should I disable updates after 6 p.m. or disable internet so things can't update, stuff like that. And that's not a good situation either. You have to have trust in your vendors. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. You have to have some level of trust with the vendors you work with. Now, thankfully, this wasn't a cybersecurity tech, because if it was, this would have been 100 times worse. If a malware writer or a hacker were able to get into an antivirus vendor, such as CrowdStrike, McAfee, or any of the others, and get access to this kernel level and use their product to piggyback their malware, this would have been 100 times worse, and we still would have had outages ongoing. I mean, if this was a ransomware event, this would have been horrific. Thankfully, it was nothing more than an address error loop that just crashed the systems, and this was relatively easy fix, even though it was very annoying and very time consuming. This could have been a lot worse. So we'll see how the fallout comes from this. But it's interesting to see how this actually came to pass. And something good to note is it's good to check and see how your antivirus vendors work, how they operate, what checks and balances they do, understanding how they operate, because you have to have complete trust in them. And after this, I would say CrowdStrike is not going to have very good trust of their solution anymore, because they used to be one of the leading ones. Their reputation was spotless, but this was a major oops on their part, and we'll see what the fallout, what happens. But I want to thank you for watching our video today. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.